My name's Matt Stevens. I'm the founder and co-CEO of Impulse, and really delighted that you've joined us on this Friday. And Michelle, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Michelle. I'm an Impulse coach and specialise working with a team on the 360s. Previous experience as in corporate HR. So this was one of my hot topics when I was in the HR role many years ago.
Fantastic. And just to say, look, Michelle is now our most in-demand coach that our clients are saying, can Michelle come and join us on the project? And it used to be me, no longer. I used to be the future once. Now it's Michelle. How do we get her onto the project? So, but on a serious note, delighted that you've all joined us. Thank you for giving up your time. We never take that for granted. We understand you've got lots and lots of things you could be doing. You've chosen to be with us, so thank you. So let's get in with us. We're going to be going till just about 12:45, and then we'll wrap it up there, so you've got some time back. So look, we wanted to just get into the whole why your workplace engagement is not improving, and want to really set out a bit of a thesis about why that is. And we've got some great external and internal data from Impulse, and then we'll get into, again, a sort of a philosophy, if you like. I don't want to say I know this is the solution, so I'm coming to you humbly and carefully to say, look, we've been doing some research internally, and we think this might be part of the answer that we'll get into as we go along. Before we do, just for those who are joining for the first time, great to see some of you who I know. Welcome. And some definitely new names and faces, so good to have you with us. Look, what we're about is helping employees be at their best. Very much, we're constantly sort of doing stories out into the press. You can see here, whether that's Forbes or Management Today, HR News. I was privileged to get published about 4 or 5 years ago now with the Engagement Revolution, which is really saying, actually, in fact, it was James Timpson, I don't know if you've seen, he's been all over LinkedIn about understanding how people feel and why. And that was really the sort of core of the book, was about actually putting people's emotions, how they're feeling, and understanding why at the center of engagement really can improve the whole culture, and also helping employees to thrive. We work with some great organizations all across the world, obviously quite UK centric, or UK and Europe, I should say, but also we work across the world. To give you sort of a flavor of that, so we're now serving in 61 countries, which I think is just under a third of the world's countries, and we've already got 41 platform languages and growing. And what that's really saying is, look, global company, we love understanding the cultural differences. It's what makes the richness of humanity. I do want to be honest, today is more of a lens on UK and Europe than necessarily across the whole world. That's certainly where the data points come from. So we'll get into that. But look, what do we want to do? Well, Michelle and I would like to cover sort of what's the well-being landscape. Then we'll get into some data and trends. Then we'll set out to you to reframe, how do we reframe to a new approach, role of the line manager within that new approach, and then some key skills that we think that they need to cultivate. So please do ask questions as we go. We'll keep an eye on that. And keep us honest. As I say, we've got about just less than 40 minutes left with you, so bear with us as we begin. So what do we mean when we talk about well-being? Well, look, honestly, there are so many. It's a bit like engagement. There are lots of different sort of measurements and approaches, but actually most do cover this, which is sort of what we tend to look at, which you can see for yourself here. So there's obviously something about the mental health, but there's also body, mind, connection, purpose, and financial. There are others, of course, I understand that, but I think we all have a sort of grasp of what we're talking about when we talk about well-being. And I understand too, there's it's a bit like the debate between engagement and experience. There's a debate between well-being and wellness. Generally, it comes out of the States who drive that around the sort of the different language. But I kind of, these are the sort of areas, if I can put it in the round, that we're going to be talking about as we think about well-being. So what we want to started with, it was really just kind of getting a bit, go a bit broad. We'll start a sort of big picture, the wider context on well-being. As I said, quite a UK particularly focused today, particularly looking at who signed up. So look, Mental Health Foundation November 23 showed poor mental health, just what it's costing, which obviously is a big impact on well-being. 118 billion a year, which I couldn't believe is about 5% of the UK's GDP, which is huge. So this is not an insignificant or small problem. And then I thought it was very interesting, a health and safety executive here showing just how many days have been lost to stress, depression or anxiety and musculoskeletal disorders, which actually account for the majority of days. And so I thought it was unbelievable. I think on average, each person is taking almost 3 weeks off work because of stress, depression, anxiety, and musculoskeletal disorders. Just for me, that was a phenomenal stat when I found it. And obviously, then you would say, I run a small business, 30 people. You'd go, wow, if everyone's having 3 weeks off a year, my God, the impact is huge. And I think, Michelle, you've certainly seen that in some of the clients we've worked with about where particularly the stress, depression, or anxiety has had quite a big impact on their days off.
Yeah, absolutely. And teams are naturally a little bit leaner than they might have been pre-pandemic. So that's putting even more pressure on resources as well. So it has a spiral effect, isn't it, on staff engagement and retention, because other staff are slightly disengaged because they feel they're pulling the weight of people who are off sick. So yeah, it has a massive knock-on effect. So not only on productivity, but the wider impact.
And then I'm sure some of you will have picked up on this over this week. There was the ONS, Office for National Statistics, put out about 9.2 million people, 1664, not in work or looking for a job. Now, for some of those, there's clear reasons why they don't need to, they don't want to, whatever. But actually, what I was quite interested in here was this slightly more detailed number: young people workless due to ill health, which obviously is poor well-being as being part of that, has more than doubled over the past decade, from 93,000 to 190,000. And you think we've got a major issue with not enough people in the workforce in the UK. And actually, those coming in, we're seeing less because of issues of well-being and ill health. And here you can see particularly people in their early 20s are now more likely to be economically inactive due to ill health than those in their 40s, which is phenomenal. We do know why, and we'll come on to show a lot of that is to do with the mental health part of well-being and the stress, depression, and anxiety. And just to finish off with a sort of wider, broader piece to sort of build into this, particularly Gen Z and millennials, young people more likely now to experience common mental disorders than any other age group, which is just unreal to think about. The report notes that, as you say, 1 in 3, so 34% of young people aged 18 to 24 reported symptoms of conditions like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, all big impacts on well-being, of course, which is up from 1 in 4. So going completely the wrong way, trending the way you don't want it to do. And I just, again, thought this was fascinating, that 500,000 people aged 18 to 24 prescribed antidepressants, which again speaks to not having a good well-being or wellness. And then just a couple of final bits. Reports found that 2018 to 2022, you've now got 1 in 5 with poor mental health problems with worklessness compared to 13% of those without. So in other words, a real issue. You've got double chance of having being workless if you have those mental health and well-being issues. And just to say, because Resolution Foundation said, look, couple, and I'm going to come back to this a bit later on, about 10 minutes time, but talked about some of the solutions being about greater mental health support, which is very interesting. So what does that mean? That's kind of what we want to get into in a way when we think about well-being, and particularly how mental health and the mind is such a big, and body is such a key parts of that. And then I really like this, that employees need a new focus on mental health in sectors where those young people with those common mental disorders. And here's what they said: who report that the awareness of their manager makes a huge difference. So remember that, everyone, because we're going to be coming back to that having the managers having the awareness of it makes a huge difference. But also the Resolution Foundation saying better management practices and mental health training for employers must be a priority. And I think that's really, really critical. And actually, Michelle, you were talking a little bit about that before we started, around how do we help line managers and whose role is it? You want to share some thoughts?
And I think if I rewind sort of 10 years ago when I worked in construction, we were probably quite forward thinking, and we'd won some awards ourselves for putting wellbeing strategies in place. And it was the go-to place then to put in mental health first aiders. And I'm sure some of you can resonate with that. You've probably still got them in the workplace. But actually, speaking to a client a few weeks ago, they actually said they've retracted from that and they've moved that strategy, because they said passing it to the first aiders meant that line managers sort of relinquishing that kind of empathy and approachability. So I think it's just an interesting observation, and one that obviously is quite a bold move, but strategies do need to evolve and meet the needs of the employees. So yeah, something just to have in your thoughts, really.
Yeah, I think for everyone listening, fascinating to know what you think about that. The slight downside of having the sort of the mental health person in the office is that you remove some of that. I mean, if we're all being honest here, we do know that managers will say we always feel overwhelmed because we've got to think about finances, we've got to think about staffing or people, we've got to think about health and safety. But also we know that sometimes managers can then abdicate and go, well, that's HR's or that's the mental health aid workers. So if we're being very honest, it's probably a bit of both. But I really thought that was fascinating around putting back some of that responsibility within the framework that is fair, because people aren't necessarily skilled up to a high level. But how can we balance that out? So it's not just we've outsourced it to that person over there and they deal with it.
Yeah, and I think one of the sorry, Matt, one other thing I've seen where clients have actually again abdicated from that central service ownership of the policy or the strategy. So making sure that line managers are really bought into that ownership of what that might look like. So I think in the early days it was traditionally sort of either a HR or a central service kind of ownership, but also in a way that's also allowed those managers to abdicate slightly. So, oh, I don't know what the EDAP service is, go and speak to HR. So actually getting them involved in the development of those strategies or initiatives is really crucial as well. So, sorry, another point bad.
No, totally agree. And as I said at the top of the webinar, for everyone, look, at Impulse, we do a lot of employee engagement, but within that, of course, we look at well-being, we actually look at leadership 360 and culture. But I just wanted to share some of our data from wellbeing research that sort of really backs up. So look, what I've tried to prove so far is we have a problem, right? Everyone kind of knows that from when we look at the meta level. So let's just get down into some of the Impulse data. And what's really interesting is what we see here. So the Wellbeing Index, this is very like an engagement index. It's typically average of 5 questions. And this is from averaging 30,000 responses per year across UK and a part of Europe, over the last 4 years. And what you see here is in 2020, we had that real spike, real positive, the Wellbeing Index, but in other words, how people feel being very positive about it and about their well-being. So pretty high. And if you remember, I know it's hard to think back, but that was a lot to do with actually a lot of companies got it right in 2020. They did pivot. They really focused a lot more time, effort, from all sorts of things that were going on. And there's a lot more checking in. There was some downsides and some shadow sides to that of, hey, I'm calling you at 9 p.m. because you're there. I'm calling you at 6 a.m. So we know there's some shadow side, but actually from and not just our data, I've seen this across a whole range of engagement data that the Wellbeing Index in 2020 was actually pretty high. Then we saw this real dip, and that was again partly because unfortunately, as can happen, businesses moved on, had some different focuses. Maybe some of that was about we've got to make some money again, and how do we sort of get back on track? So that becomes a higher focus than necessary well-being, and there was quite a big drop. And then really, you can see it sort of bumbled along. It hasn't really moved. And I guess our thesis for all of you who've joined and are listening afterwards is, look, it's plateaued. So well-being, first it dropped and then it's plateaued here. And what this is showing is almost over a third of people don't have a high well-being index. They don't have a positive, well-being index, which is a real issue if you think about that in your organization. Think about a third of people in that position. What I've just got here is these are sort of the typical questions about, are you getting enough support? What's your workload like? Do you feel connected? Mental health and work-life balance. They make up typically people's well-being indexes. So first thing is it's plateaued, right? And so that's a slight problem. And then I just wanted to show this point that's coming out already from the wider data, which has been about when we look at the well-being by age, and I think it's very, very interesting. By the way, we did look at gender and ethnicity, and it was about 2 percentage points between on some of that, but across a range of different segmentations. But this one really stood out. It was the age segmentation that really caught our eye as being quite different. So you can see here on the 2023 results, actually the well-being index for those over 35 is 5 percentage points higher, where it's actually about 0. So it's about on the 66. So in other words, this is the younger people, the Gen Z and some millennials holding back this well-being index, which is absolutely fascinating and really does chime with that wider external data of what we're seeing. And then just finally, I want to sort of get into again some of the argument we're setting out, which is, so why has it plateaued? what's going on. And I think this is really interesting here, because what I just wanted to pull out, and we could see very clearly, the story became very obvious really from the data, is that actually on some of those more connection relationship sides, it's dropped quite significantly. So if you look at supportive team in 2020, people saying I feel part of a supportive community, team, or network, 79 percentage points in 2020. It's now 70, which is about 15% or 9 percentage points, that's a huge drop. And that's just trended downwards over the last 3 years. And again, the sort of that key relationship, so key relationship, if you like, with your community and others, and then that key relationship you have with your line manager caring about you, has dropped even further, about 18% or 11 percentage points. So this is not what we want to see. And it does speak to why maybe it's plateaued, is that we're just seeing these drops in particularly these relational elements of well-being. Whereas if you look at this final question, it's very interesting about the awareness and use of well-being support and tools. So it was already quite high at 77. It's actually trended upwards. And behind this is very simple. It's people knowing, yeah, there's an app here. Yeah, there's a mental first aid health worker there. It's that type of stuff. Do they know where the support is and the tools available to them? And I guess for us, Michelle, I know we were talking about this before. There's this quite clear story, as I described it, coming out, which is well-being has plateaued. The reason it seems plateaued is because we're seeing some drops in a couple of key scores, and the ones that are going up are not necessarily having a positive impact on the overall wellbeing index, which is about the support and the tools. And I think, we've talked about this a lot over the last year in different companies we worked in, that there is a sense in which business has tried to do its best, but what it's done, and the reason it's not working, to go to the sort of title of this webinar, is because often it's been activities or tools that they've sort of put to their employees. What are your thoughts on that, Michelle?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where that metric sits there with the care, because actually people see through that. So a set of tools and support. Yes, we want employees to be more self-led, and particularly when we've moved to hybrid, but in the same instance that people can see through that's not genuine, that's not really line managers connecting and caring. So that kind of approachability, that empathy is kind of waning slightly. So I think we've also got to remember there's a different generation and different set of expectations. So what caring means to them might be slightly different again. And I think that's where line managers are not careful of applying the same set of principles that they've maybe passed for their previous generations as well. So I think it's really insightful to think that there's that connection between we're using central services, this is a tool, this is a set of support that we do, and line managers can kind of continue as they've done before, and that's where employees can see through the lack of authenticity, unfortunately.
Yeah, and without going too deep for a Friday lunchtime, I think it's really interesting that often from the solutions I've seen and we've seen, they are what you call sort of classically capitalistic, which is, well, people need money or resources. And it's very interesting because actually, my humble, very unknowledgeable opinion of almost every religion would say the opposite. It's that it's learning to find peace or well-being without material things. And actually, it's often to do with the internals, which I'm going to come on to in a moment. So just to kind of round this sort of moment up, and then we'll pivot into what's the reframe that we're suggesting. Look, the impact negatively is just huge. I mean, you all know this in terms of the complete loss of trust. You see, you lose skilled workers, which is coming out from the ONS loud and strong, that data, and often they're very experienced. Does create this poor culture that can then be challenging to revive and just takes quite some time. You get that loss of communication, connection, understanding, so the relationships suffer effectively. Ultimately, there's no doubt you see disengaged employees. That's very clear, and I'll show that in a moment. And then a massive decline in performance, which affects your competitive advantage. So the kind of negative impacts are pretty well known. And just to bring in, so it's not just our data, Josh Burson Academy, I'm sure some of you come across, talked about the impact of wellbeing programs. 72% saying they improve engagement. So that's Wise Impulse talk about it, who's known as employee engagement, because actually wellbeing is so connected to engagement. And 53% saying they improve productivity, to have some kind of approach, some kind of actual focus on wellbeing. And then Gallup talked about employees with high engagement, high well-being are 27% more likely to report excellent performance in their own job or work. And it kind of, you instinctively know that, right, Michelle, don't you? You know when you're feeling good and you're feeling connected and you feel like you're engaged with the company, and physically and mentally and financially you feel pretty good, then generally you tend to get a better performance from yourself, because you're flowing, if you like. That's why we have those words like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if it's authentic and it's backed up from an employer's perspective, it leads on into their other lives as well. So it's not just from a professional perspective, is it? It's actually going to have the benefits for them in their general personal life, which we know has a knock-on effect as well.
Yeah. So I think just to bring this into sort of the next part, and thank you for staying with us, and please do put anything in the chat if you've got any views, opinions. More than happy. You're all being wonderfully great, and but I'd love to get your views and opinions on what's been said so far. But thank you for bearing with us. And so what I want to do now is just completely look at like what's maybe a slightly different approach to help you improve well-being, to get out of this stuckness, because we do seem stuck. So how do we unstick ourselves? Because I'm not sure throwing more money at them, particularly activities and tools, is necessarily going to achieve it. And so here at Impulse, we've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of research, a lot of reviewing, and a lot of actually what have we seen work well in some of the organizations where this is going better than maybe some of the others. And I want to start with this idea of, actually, when we think about well-being, I think that the key to it is relationships. And I think there are 3 key relationships. And the first one is actually with yourself. And some of you might know this is a little bit of like SQ. So we talk about IQ. We all understand what that means. EQ has obviously been in the zeitgeist for quite some time now. But I think over the next decade, we're going to have to move more and more into this sort of SQ, which is a spiritual quota, if you like, where we do understand people are more than just physical, and they're more than just good capitalists who money solves everything. That actually it comes about, how do we help people have a great relationship with themselves, right? So bear with me. We understand, all of us in our own lives, I'm sure some of us on the webinar will meditate. We know that living in the present, some of these things, cultivating a positive mindset. And I think one of the things that Michelle and I have had the privilege of doing is we do a lot around managing your mind and emotions at work, and really giving people, when I say tools, I don't mean physical tools, I mean the sort of mental tools about how to help people really manage their own minds and emotions. And then obviously that practicing self-care. And certainly I can talk even from my own experience. I've been journaling now for about 5 years, and it's had a huge impact on my well-being and my mental health. Just being able to write down every day. I just have one of these, basically it gives you 2 sentences to write. And I just tend to start with, what I noticed today was, and then I write something down. But we kind of know this instinctively. But what my challenge is to organizations is, how do we actually help people have a great relationship with themselves? Because if we don't, candidly, they're going to be walking civil wars. And we know some of those people, right, who are wandering around the office as walking civil wars. They're at war with themselves, and it's just not healthy for them first, but then obviously the impact that has more widely. Michelle, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that, isn't it? For us, it's about that mindset. I think if we can help individuals manage those emotions, I mean, actually, we kind of forget that work and personal self, don't we? They walk in that door and they're bringing that personal stuff to work every day, day in, day out. Yeah. And so we've heard that quite a lot recently from clients, that actually it's not just about dealing with the individual and their mental health, but actually it's all the stuff that they may be dealing with at home, and particularly maybe adolescents who are struggling with mental health as well. So if they can look after themselves and have that self-care, that's also a huge impact on those benefits that we touched on in the previous slide.
Yeah. So you might say to me, so what does that mean practically, Matt? Well, we would say actually starting as soon as people are onboarded, some coaching programs or some coaching opportunities to actually help people understand how to have a really healthy relationship with themselves is a really good thing. Great if they want to choose to be patronized and say, I know how to do this, brilliant, well, show us. And for those who are a bit more open and curious, then I think that will help them to find the pathways and what they need to actually work on themselves first. Because I would say, for me, a lot of the issues of well-being start internally with the thoughts and the emotions and the feelings that we're thinking. And in fact, just as always happens, when you're because I've spent 2 weeks really, pulling all this together, and then you start to your antennae is up. It's called your RAS, your reticular activating system. So it's a bit like when you're buying a house or you're selling a house, or you're buying a car and you're looking at Minis or whatever it might be, or a Ford, and all you see is Fords everywhere. And so all I heard was stuff around this. And one really interesting radio show picked up on the other day was how much cognitive behavioral therapy is now playing a part in helping offenders not re-offend. So they actually found there's a 50% less chance of people re-offending where they'd had CBT over about the course of 6 months versus being put in prison. I mean, that's just phenomenal. So there were, in other words, and the guy he was such a classic sort of, quite a dour sort of character, but very drolly saying, yeah, there's just no doubt that by going through this program where they help to look at their mind, their emotions, and how they kind of manage themselves, they don't re-offend as much versus chucking them in prison. So I think we're starting to see this more widely, and I actually think it's something that probably is a good example of something you would offer employees and say, look, why don't you go through the CBT to support and help you, rather than it seeing as a sort of negative thing. Actually, it's a really positive thing that's going to support you in your growth. And we all talk about growth mindset, don't we? And then we go, well, what does that actually mean? Well, it means putting yourself in situations and positions where you've got to grow beyond your capacity, capability, and skills that you currently have right now. So let's just move on. So what's the other key relationship? It's actually with others. And so we got to start with ourselves when we're thinking about well-being and how we help people. How are they helping themselves? How can we support them? But then the second is key relationships with others. And so, of course, that means those around you. Of course, it means your line manager, actually means the senior leaders. They tend to be the three key ones. Sometimes it's those report to you, your peers, and those who lead you. And what does that look like? Again, it's about how do we give others the benefit of the doubt, because that's really, really good for your well-being, actually, rather than thinking really negative thoughts. How do you live and let live, which is in 2024, Western society seems to be less prevalent, and it seems to be more about, no, I have to see this through and everyone has to be held to account. You go, quite possibly. The flip side of that is then there's constant tension that never ends. And then how do we cultivate compassion for one another? Why is that important? You can see here it's about building that connection and collaboration. There's no doubt that when you have great, healthy relationships with others, it reduces stress and irritation. And by the way, we can really see this. So the evidence we have of this is in 2021 and 2022, stress and irritation were the two highest emotions on the platform. This is used by 500,000 employees around the world. And almost always, the number one reason why was relationship with the line manager. Fascinating, right? So again, you might think, Matt, you're being a bit ethereal and a bit up there and a bit woo-woo. Let me earth that in. 500,000 people, the majority saying we're stressed and irritated. It's actually to do with our relationship with the line manager. We don't get on, they don't lead well, and it's causing me, this relationship friction is causing me not to feel good. My well-being is impacted. So any thoughts on this, Michelle?
Yeah, I think for me, we see it a lot in the coaching and the others piece, don't we? Where individuals will come and there is that kind of slight blame. And so with the NLP, we ask what their map of the world is obviously very different. So I think giving them that benefit of the doubt is hugely important. What happens if you just let it go? People don't see that. I think we're in this mindset where we want to kind of dig out other people and point the finger. So I think it's incredibly powerful when we ask those coaching questions around why that person's faced that challenge in that situation. And they're on a different map of the world than that individual. And we forget that sometimes. We live in a society where we think everybody's going to be sort of minions of each other. We've got a set of competencies, set of values, but in reality, there's that discretional piece where we need to let others have that benefit of doubt.
Yeah, and I think for everyone listening again, something else we're really seeing play out in the workplace is the generational divide. And it's just coming through in the data very clearly about sometimes people aren't connecting or being compassionate in terms of understanding why people are saying certain things. And it can be two main reasons that comes out. One is values. So I would say Gen X and boomers, so basically anyone who's above sort of 42, having been brought up with different values to those now being brought up. I'm not getting into the rights and wrongs. What's happening though is there's sometimes the clash of those values, and that therefore the behaviours that follow from the values that you have. And I think actually then even down to things like you know, we all know that the classic things that then start happening is you start to typecast, so oh well they're snowflakes, and the downside, and the big downside with that is you're not actually cultivating curiosity, you're not building bridges. What you're doing is dividing. And I think what we're seeing, some of the best work we see with a couple of clients is where they're trying to really bridge build across different segmentations, if you like. So it's no longer about how do we just divide by this is about them or this is about others, and always talk about other, but actually start talking about us and together, and actually creating conversations and space for conversations around some of this. So some quite pioneering work a couple of our clients are doing around taking some social issues, creating safe spaces for people to be able to have honest and open conversations about what they had thought and why they thought that, and why that might not be appropriate for today or why that might be appropriate for today. And this is the sort of stuff, and you go, oh gosh, do business have to get into this? Hell yeah, because it's having a huge impact, and it's actually holding back some of that collaboration. It's causing that real negativity on their well-being, and it's stopping some of that positive work environment that we really need to see grow. So let's bring you to the final. We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to bring you to the final circle and relationships we're thinking about. So we've started obviously with yourself. When we think about well-being and what's the key to well-being, it's about how do we help people have a great relationship with themselves? How do we then help people have great relationships with others? And then finally, how do you help people have great relationships kind of beyond? And what do I mean by that? Well, really that, you know, words you might use is you might use God, love, religion, or you might use purpose, meaning, existence, you know, because one of the things we're seeing, particularly again, if we take Gen Z, is that they're less bought into, well, this is the path I just follow and I just get on with it. They are much more curious about spirituality than probably a lot of generations before that, and they're certainly not in the sort of mainstream. They're much more open to all of it, and behind that seems to be this idea of what is the meaning and purpose. And you go, well, why does that matter at work? Well, again, for this big reason, if you think that all of your meaning and purpose is just work, well, we can already see what Gen Z do is they check out and they go, well, forget that, because that's not enough. And so for us, it's about helping people navigate some of this. What is that meaning and purpose? And actually, the other thing is where you see people have a stronger meaning and purpose than just work, so beyond work, if you like, they then actually can handle work and deal with work in a much better way, because it's not all consuming and they've not made it the god, if you like, that then when it lets them down, they get really angry and really grumpy with it. And I just thought this was really powerful. Actually, research has shown, you can see where the research is from here, the value of a purposeful life, that people who have a sense of purpose are happier, more resilient and more successful than those who don't. They're also more likely to contribute positively to society and the environment. So vast amount of evidence. I'm just using one here about the importance of having that sense of purpose and meaning that is beyond just work, so that work then can take its real place without becoming everything. Michelle, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk a lot in coaching about being curious, and I think sometimes what we hear from line managers alike is the fact that, you know, you ask them to explore an experiment, but actually processes and tools sometimes prohibit them. So I think we have to think about that in the design of stuff we do, and like with wellbeing, you know, we've made it kind of easy, and we've given them a set of tools and policies and strategies, and actually they can't always be curious and playful with that. So, you know, just think about it back into that more corporate perspective. I think that's incredibly important, and it's something we always advocate in coaching. You know, be more curious, and I think that's line managers would really understand then what that person's take of the world is and what that meaning is for them as well.
Yeah, and also the view, you know, that, you know, well-being has plateaued. It's not working, and companies have thrown billions at apps and activities that just haven't had the impact. They're not shifting, they're not moving the dial, as you'd say, right? So for me, it's like, you know, as I say, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. So actually, let's be curious to looking at different ways. And then if you look at some of what's behind some of that stopping well-being, it seems to be about relationships, which is why I'm advocating this. So thank you for bearing with us. We've got 8 minutes left. I'm going to give you some real practical focus, Michelle and I, on particularly like the line manager and the role then that we need to help them play when it comes to this, because they have such a big impact. As we know, 70% of the variance in team engagement is determined solely by the line manager. They are really crucial in this relationship that they build, and that's the one we're just going to focus on, particularly the importance of trust and support. You can see here employees who feel supported. So this is what we've got to help managers do. This is about their relationship with them. So that's hence our model, are 3 times more engaged at work. You can see here, absolutely unbelievable. Big impact, right? So this can practically have a big impact on your organization. But we've got this problem. 33% of managers feel out their depth supporting their teams with mental health concerns, which is a key part of well-being, and particularly for that Gen Z. So how do we help them in these last sort of 6-7 minutes navigate it? So here's some ideas. The first is very much how do we, by the way, sorry, the saddest thing is I saw yesterday there was a big article out on can't remember, it was one of like the Gallup whatever, saying that the drop in investment in coaching and support has been huge this year. It's literally dropped off a cliff. So in other words, companies are not putting budget to this. But our view would be you've got to do that coaching and that support of growing managers' empathy and emotional intelligence. Michelle, tell us about that, because we've been doing quite a lot of work on this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably been made harder post-COVID as well, because a lot of this comes with approachability. And I think line managers have struggled with that when they've gone into either a hybrid or remote working practice as well. So really getting them to grips with what their employees are feeling, thinking, and, ultimately, how do we genuinely support for that empathy without hiding behind a set of tools and processes? It's that authenticity that sits behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know we all sort of, it's in the kind of culture now about emotional intelligence, but it's still just not used enough. And I think there's still so much work we do with line managers around certainly having awareness of their own emotions and how they come across, and then having awareness of others and what's going on. And it's just, and to go back to that very first slide I showed where it said, young people who know that their manager's aware of it, it helps them so much that the manager's picking up on it and seeing it. So for us, we would say, look, and say we've got the privilege of actually running a couple of programs at the moment, or coaching sessions with managers around heightening their emotional intelligence, firstly of themselves and how they're coming across, but then secondly of the teams that they lead. Why is that important? Because that starts to build bridges. It starts to create curiosity and compassion, and it starts to then help people feel like they can connect and they are cared for by their line manager. Second is very practical about that active listening conversation. So you can have all the great emotional intelligence and then not be great at listening and conversations. And Michelle, we've had some great fun over the last 6 months, haven't we? Where we run, just for all of you listening, we run this great little skills drills where we get managers to pair up, and we basically get them to try and have an open conversation for 2 minutes. So basically you can only ask open questions. And if the other person, if they ask a closed question, so a yes or no answer, the other person gets to shut them down and just go yes or no. And honestly, it's hilarious every time, isn't it? Because you tell everyone what happens.
It's quite shocking, because we've done it in multiple sectors, multiple size businesses, and I'm absolutely alarmed sometimes by the kind of fright on their face when you ask them to do it. And I would say it's the minority more than the majority who can comfortably and confidently ask those open questions. It's it's great to do these skills drills and then pick up that with some coaching after as to how they get more comfortable with it. So yeah, they can get the accessibility, they can be available and approachable, but actually if they're then not listening, it's fundamentally a sticking point, isn't it, to really understand what their staff and employees' needs are.
Yeah, so we're sort of trying to start with mindset. You've got to help people with some mindset and some key kind of what they need to be thinking, how they need to be thinking, which is this sort of empathy, emotional intelligence. Then we come to skill set, which is actually how can you practically run some skills drills to improve their active listening conversations, which is what we do. And a lot of this comes because at Impulse, of course, we love doing the survey and getting the data, and then we love to tell the story of what it's saying and then solve the issue. And as salesy as I'll get today, I'll say that's one of the great things we get from people is they say what we love is you don't only tell us what's going on, you can help us solve it as well. So let me just finish on the final point. It's about this knowledge and training, and that's already been picked up. That there's no doubt that when it comes to some of those more practical elements, whether it's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, whether it's about some of the mental health pieces, we're going to have to sort of focus and go, how do we help the line manager actually get some of that knowledge and that actual training that they need? And Michelle, you mentioned this earlier where you said you know, maybe we've overdone it and put it too much in the hands of the experts who then are sort of over there, so that line managers have sort of got the feeling of, well, I don't need to worry about that. What this is sort of our antidote to that, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's even happening in other strands, isn't it? You know, it's not just a disservice to line managers, but in a way we've kind of encouraged them to kind of move away from some of that. So even just the having those conversations and setting those expectations, we've seen it quite a lot with clients where they're coming to us now to say, look, how do we have those difficult conversations? You know, if you want to call it that, how do we have those performance conversations? Because in a way, we've kind of put corporate processes and governance in place, and we've kind of dissolved some of that slightly. So then when we ask them just to understand what the expectations are of the staff and get comfortable with how the employees are feeling and being approachable and empathetic, it's quite tricky. So they are needing that support themselves, as well as how they support their employees.
Yeah, fantastic. So look, I want to bring this into to land, and I guess I would say, firstly, thank you for joining. Really appreciate that. I'd love to know what you think. So please, matt@impulse.com. It's a dead easy one to know. matt@impulse.com or michelle.page@impulse.com. Do share your thoughts, your views, because we're going to be going out more and more with this. We're going to be testing this more and more in organizations and saying, look, this is the sort of focus that we think you need to give to well-being. But really appreciate you taking the time today to be on with Michelle and I.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And emoji in the chat box, your exit emoji, let us know how you're feeling. That'll be good.
Love that. Love that. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of the day and a great weekend when it comes.